What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of this week's episode, where we're going to tackle the question of whether it's okay for therapists to have problems. Or more specifically, what kinds of problems are okay for therapists to have. Part of the reason why I wanted to address this question is, one, I can't believe that this is still an issue, that therapists in particular can tend to police each other and say that certain problems are unacceptable for therapists to have. And I just want to, let's stop doing that. So I guess kind of spoiler alert, you know where I stand on this one. Therapists are allowed to have problems. Pretty much all the problems that humans have, therapists have too. That's just, total spoiler alert. You can stop the video now. But okay, please stay. I would love it if you stayed, but you can leave if you want. But not only am I motivated by wanting to discourage this sort of therapist self-policing that seems to still be happening, but I also notice this dynamic that seems to simultaneously pull us in these two very opposite directions. Over and over, we are encouraged, appropriately so, to practice self-care. And that includes an array of things and often can include seeing our own therapists, seeking supervision, seeking consultation, and hopefully vulnerably and honestly sharing about our experiences in those contexts so that we can get the support that we need, including whatever array of problems, concerns, issues, etc. that we might be experiencing. However, unfortunately, in so many contexts, we continue to receive this messaging that certain kinds of problems are not acceptable for therapists to have. So what to do for the therapist who maybe has one of those quote unquote problems and then is trying to get support for it, but feels like they're not allowed to talk to their consult group, their supervisor, or maybe even their personal therapist about it because maybe those problems are problems they think they're not supposed to have. So then you have this recipe for secrecy and shame because now you're not allowed to have the problem that you have and you're not allowed to get help for the problem that you have. So none of this is working. So I think I just spoiled the whole episode explaining why it's happening and what my opinions are, but I think there's a lot more that we can get into here. I've been leaning on the Our Therapists subreddit for a couple of videos recently. I found some fairly recent posts that suggest that this is very much still a concern. This post, I think, is worth reading the whole thing in this extended cut version. This post is from 3 years ago on the subreddit titled, "Therapists with Mental Health Struggles Need Advice." They say, "Hi everyone, I was very reluctant to post this due to fear of getting negative feedback, but I feel like I'm in dire need of advice." Oh, I'm sorry, I'm already bracing for it. I'm in my first year of grad school and finishing up my practicum hours. I have no idea how I made it this far. I know, all the snaps, good job. But basically, I have borderline personality disorder and debilitating anxiety, which were somewhat manageable. However, I've been starting to notice that I'm constantly getting triggered internally during literally every session I have with clients. That's tough. I feel extremely anxious in session, that I either talk too fast, that I myself lose track of what I'm saying, or I freeze and I don't know what to say. This turns into a cycle of beating myself up, and I'm so drained by the end of the day. I feel so much for this person. I'm too ashamed to bring this up in supervision because I don't want them to think I'm too mentally unwell to be in this program. I've worked so hard to get where I am, and I don't want to throw it away because of anxiety. I am already doing all the internal work, etc., but I still can't shake the feeling of extreme insecurity. And they go on to say, they feel like people in their cohort don't have this problem. They've done everything they can and still can't seem to shake just how terrible they're feeling and how much this is affecting them. And then they say, I guess I'm asking if there's any other therapists or grad students out there with borderline personality disorder who managed to get through this or who relate. Any helpful input or advice would be greatly appreciated. And I love this. They added this on later. This extra edit says, "Thank you all for your wonderful and compassionate responses. I didn't expect to get that much support, and compassionate means a lot. It really helps to know that other people have similar experiences, and that is not a dead end. Much love to all of you." Even without reading any of the responses, I'm so grateful that at least in this context, people overall were supportive to this individual. This experience feels so common. Maybe not every single therapist has a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder because, not every single person in the general population has the same diagnosis, but Like fill in the blank, whatever struggles, mental health concern, just any kind of gamut of issues that humans experience in our lives. Like therapists have all of them. And then we can so often have this exact same narrative and concern that like, I'm basically not allowed to have these problems. And then we hit the snag where we see how whatever our human experiences are can have some impact on our work. And then rather than feeling like we can go reach out for help in the places that are supposed to be designed to help us, like talking to a supervisor, we feel like we're not allowed to say anything because maybe we think we're not supposed to have this problem to begin with. And then, the cycle then of like, I can only imagine that would just loop back on to the anxiety and whatever else is going on for somebody in that situation. But I empathize, like if you tell your supervisor, is your supervisor going to tell your school? And then I also found some other similar posts on this thread, one as recent as just a few months ago. So this is definitely a concern that's alive and well. So beyond just sort of like lurking around on Reddit, as I like to do, I was curious to ask you all to share some of your input on what some of these problems that therapists aren't, quote, supposed to have are, just based on your experiences and perceptions. So I put this poll out on Instagram that says, quote, what problems/struggles are therapists not, quote, supposed to have? And y'all came through. I didn't count how many responses there are, but definitely a healthy amount of responses. And we saw some themes come up. So I thought it might be helpful to name what some of those themes are and then maybe follow up, like, do therapists struggle with these problems that, based on your responses, people think we're not supposed to have? Can we just poke holes into this further and further? So the top response or category of response by far was relational and family issues. There were 12 total responses in this category, and I'll rattle off a few of these to kind of paint the picture of how people responded. And remember, people are answering the question, what problems or struggles are therapists not, quote, supposed to have? Someone says, problems in your marriage, relationship difficulties, trouble expressing wants and needs, marital or other relational problems, relationship problems, go through a divorce, relationship issues/poor communication, family conflict. Definitely we're hearing a theme come up, like relational, family conflict, divorce getting mentioned directly as well. It's interesting if you think of this question at face value. We might say, like, therapists shouldn't have significant relationship or family issues, because isn't one of the primary things that we help people do is to navigate relationship and family issues? And so if we can't get our stuff together in our relationship and our family, assuming we even have a relationship or a family to begin with, by the way, which is also its own sub issue, but we're not even going to tackle that in this episode. Like, if we can't, quote unquote, solve whatever our relationship family issues are, how are we then supposed to help other people do the same? But this raises the question, like, do therapists have relationship problems? Do they have the same amount of relationship problems as the general population? Do they have more? Do they have less? And this is one of those things that we only have so many ways of like attempting to measure. One thing that can be measured is divorce rates, which, a couple can very much be married and have relationship issues. So divorce rates isn't always a predictor of how satisfactory a relationship is or how healthy a relationship is. I know it's like a big tangent to basically say even divorce rates, I don't think is an exact match for how healthy a relationship is, but it tells us something. So the question is, how many therapists get divorced and how does that compare to the general population? I'll reference this data from a place called Flowing Data that mapped out the percentage of divorce based on different occupations. Here's counselors. And for those who are listening and not watching, the median divorce rate, just based on the image, it doesn't give the exact percent, but just eyeballing it looks like it's falling at around 36%. And if you look at this general chart, it's right pretty much in the middle, definitely right along that median line. So at least based on this census data of divorce and occupation, counselors are right in the middle of the road, like right in the median divorce rate amongst the different occupations. And one of the hypotheses as far as what influences divorce rate based on occupation is actually how much income a particular occupation earns on average, as well as how much education that occupation requires. So to sum up, the divorce rate amongst therapists is basically reflective of the national average. Fancy that. Therapists are humans too, with relationship problems too. And this isn't what this episode's about, but I just see this so much everywhere that it's worth noting that divorce rate doesn't necessarily correspond with an individual's health. I think there's a lot of cases where somebody opting to divorce their partner is someone who's opting towards health, to say, hey, maybe I was in a different state when I ended up in this relationship. Maybe there was some variables going on that had me end up in this relationship that's ultimately unhealthy. And now, as I've grown or I've self-reflected or whatever happened over time, I now realize that I need to exit this relationship in order to move towards health. I think sometimes we look at divorce rates and see that as unhealthy, but sometimes divorce is the outcome that is healthiest. Usually people go through like a really long time trying to not get divorced before they get to that point. You know what I mean? Anyway, we don't need to trail off on that in this episode, but I think about that not infrequently. And yeah, therapists have relationship problems, I think is the best summary we can come up with here. And the next most common response in this poll that I put out lined up with kind of what my hunch was that people would say, and that's things in the category of personal mental health or addiction-related concerns. Some examples of folks' responses in this category included depression, anxiety, or eating disorders. Someone else says having mental health challenges or needing support on a bad day. Another says some believe we are immune to mental health diagnoses. Helpers are supposed to have these. That's an interesting comment. Somebody says helpers are supposed to have these. The list goes on. Addiction issues, anxiety, depression, addiction, eating disorders. Not allowed to have depression, anxiety, or marital or relationship problems. So somebody lumped them together. Listen, but let me put it this way, just speaking for myself, if I am looking for my very own personal therapist, I need therapy and I'm looking for a therapist, as I have done many times in my life. At this point in my life, if there's any kind of clue or signal in that therapist's materials or maybe self-disclosure that they've been through some kind of mental health struggle, I find that so much more reassuring, right? It's not, this person who is so healthy, so self-aware that they have never struggled with anything ever. Then for me, it's going to feel like at best, this person who genuinely is doing their best and wants to help me is helping me through something that they have not even an inkling of what it's like to go through, and at worst might lack self-awareness and be so high and mighty that they think that they're above mental health issues that they will look down on me. So I really like it. It's not a prerequisite, but I really appreciate it if somebody is, humble enough and self-aware enough and vulnerable enough to say like, yep, I don't have to spew my whole life story, but like I've been through it myself and I'm here to help you. I know what it's like. Like I immediately just feel an exhale like, okay, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. They get it. They get some amount of it, even if it's not the exact, kind of concern that I might be looking for help with. And it's also worth commenting, even if we enter this job without any kind of mental health concerns, like we're helping people through really heavy things, it would be quite reasonable for us to then come into various types of mental health concerns like secondary trauma or burnout, right? There's things that come up kind of by nature of the job itself. So I would expect that actually mental health concerns might be quite high for therapists, especially because for so many of us, we enter the field because we've dealt with our own mental health concerns. Raising my hand, myself included. It just makes sense to me. Like we go through something really hard and we feel how much either we wish we had support and we didn't, or we appreciated the support that we got as we went through or are continuing to go through hard things. And now we want to turn around and offer that same kind of support to other people. Like that is such a wonderful I think, such a generous and wonderful motivator for being a therapist. I think the idea of having been through a mental health concern or an addiction issue and then coming out the other side and becoming a therapist is like a trope. I think that is generally glorified in our profession. But the idea that like today, right now, I am struggling with some kind of mental health concern that's significantly impacting my life and I'm helping other people through their mental health concerns, I think there are a lot of circles where that is frowned upon. And again, I get it at face value, but it's just unrealistic. Like, therapists are humans who go through their own hard things, and we're still showing up for our jobs as we help others. Of course, as with anything, if there's something that's affecting our ability to do our jobs well, we are obligated ethically to make sure we're getting the support we need so that we can make adjustments and make sure that our clients are cared for while we're hopefully also taking care of ourselves. But that doesn't preclude us from having mental health concerns or even severe mental health concerns. So all of this raises the question, what is the rate of, like, let's say, mental health concerns, mental health diagnoses amongst therapists? I looked into this and it's not the easiest question to answer, but I did find this helpful article that I think is actually like a podcast interview from the Association for Psychological Science titled "A Paradox in the Field: Mental Health Disorders Amongst Psychologists." As is always true, anything that I mention in an episode, I link to, so you can find this linked in the description if you wish. This article is really an interview between Ludmila Nunes and Sarah Victor, who they had on as a guest. And Sarah Victor is being interviewed about some of their research about rates of mental health concerns and diagnoses amongst therapists. And here is a quote from this article. Sarah Victor says, quote, "We ask people very broadly, have you ever had a mental health difficulty? Yes or no? And we didn't define that for people. We let people define that for themselves." And then later they go on to say, "We also asked, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition by a professional? Yes or no? And we found that over 80% of respondents said yes to that broad mental health difficulties questions, and a little under half said yes to the diagnosis by a professional." And then the interviewer asks about how that compares with the general population. And Sarah Victor says, quote, "Overall, rates are pretty similar to what we find from large epidemiological studies that assess lifetime prevalence of any mental health condition." They go on to say, "The area where we see some differences is that we would often sort of define or refer to as quote unquote severe mental illness. So things like psychotic disorders, personality disorders, we tended to see a little bit lower prevalence than you find in population studies." Now, before we keep diving into the rest of the themes that popped up in this poll, I'd like to thank Powbox for sponsoring this episode. Based on a poll that I put out last year, only 1/4 of therapists are confident that the email they're using is HIPAA secure. That means that 3 out of 4 therapists listening to this ad right now either aren't using HIPAA secure email or aren't sure if it's HIPAA secure. In 2023, I made the switch to Powbox, and it's been smooth sailing since. Powbox is the simplest, most effective solution for mental health professionals to seamlessly integrate HIPAA security into our email, all while using our favorite email provider. It's just running smoothly and quietly in the background, keeping any potential space invaders from interfering with your emails. If you'd like to check out Powbox for yourself, they're offering Private Practice Skills listeners a special discount. Just use coupon code SKILLS at checkout to get $250 off your first year with Powbox. Thank you again to Powbox for sponsoring this episode, and now on to the rest of the poll. Okay, the rest of the themes that popped up in this poll had much fewer responses than those first 2 primary themes, but I think they're still worth noting. The next most common theme, with 4 items kind of connecting to this theme, was emotion dysregulation. Here's some of the responses people sent. Trouble regulating emotions or anxiety. Emotional dysregulation. Somebody phrased it with a question mark. Emotional regulation? Question? And the last one, intrusive thoughts or struggles with parenting. And then they put in parentheses, child therapist. It's an interesting thing, like the idea that therapists must be kind of more chill, more zen. You can keep your cool a little bit better than average. And I don't know if this is a research phenomenon of like, can therapists keep their cool better in their personal life than the average person in the population? That'd be probably a little bit harder to study, I imagine. But just anecdotally, I think it's very, very common for therapists to be able to, in the therapy session, put on their therapy hat, be in work mode, and keep their cool like, so great. Do such an amazing job. achieving Zen mode therapist. And meanwhile, at home in their personal life, whoever is in their innermost circles, just not be able to achieve that same level of emotion regulation because, of course, like we're personally invested in our relationships. I think about this all the time. Like the people that I get most annoyed with are not my therapy clients. It's the people that I share a living space with. And it's not because they are more annoying, though. Let me tell you, the things that a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old can get away with are just... But nonetheless, it's not just that. It's because you are like stuck with the people that you're with, versus like you come in for 50 minutes, bye-bye, I'll see you next week. I'm guessing if there were a way to research this, probably the level of emotion dysregulation that therapists experience, I should say, in their personal lives, hopefully not professionally with their clients, but in their personal lives probably reflects the general population because we're human. We're human. Okay, another one that came up a lot is that therapists were saying we're not, quote unquote, supposed to experience lack of empathy for our clients. Someone says lack of empathy toward clients, AKA burnout. Someone else says not liking their client. And a third one says struggle taking on their client's mental load. The idea that we're supposed to like every single client is kind of ludicrous, especially if we imagine that for at least some of our clients, if not most of them, they're having some problems that likely impact their relationships. And it would be very, very normal and expected that if they're bringing that into the session, they might be bringing some of those characteristics in their relationship with us. Great. So what do we do with that? Can we work with that and help them? It's kind of a good thing to me, I think, when it comes up. Because then that means hopefully they're not masking whatever their problems are. You're seeing it for what it is, and hopefully you can help them. And to be clear, I like almost all of my clients, but we all have had at least some clients that we don't like. And that's just normal human experience. Doesn't mean that we can't help them. Another category that came up was money concerns that therapists aren't supposed to have, which stands out. Some responses in this category just says, money issues, just work for pennies and help your clients and be thankful for what you get, LOL. Yeah, I can't believe that one's still going around. But that one's solidly still going around. It's tough. And another response in this category, dissatisfaction with low pay reimbursement from insurance. Like kind of same thing, like you work so hard, you've probably accrued a ton of student debt. You've delayed your income a ton because it takes forever to get licensed in our profession. And then you come out and you get paid comparable levels to somebody who has a college degree and sometimes even professions that only require a high school diploma. So yeah, it makes sense that we'd have money concerns about that. This isn't across the board, but definitely on average can be true. So there were a couple of responses that I thought was kind of interesting. I titled these as having a human range of emotions, that maybe somehow we're not supposed to have that. The responses were fear of rejection. That sounds like a human experience. And another response says with grief and loss. If any profession is the profession that should experience emotions and potentially intensely, would it not be our profession? But yes, I think some people do kind of expect us to be a bit robotic and not feel feelings. And another category that came up, I just called being affected by our client work. I guess this does kind of overlap with the lack of empathy for clients. But some responses in this one say struggling to let go of distress after a session. And another one says we aren't supposed to be impacted by the work we do, i.e. secondary trauma, or minimally we are not to be impacted by the work we do. Yeah, of course we're impacted by the work we do. Like the dichotomy there of like the most valuable predictor of how effective and successful therapy treatment is how genuine the client believes the therapeutic relationship is. Basically, if a client believes that their therapist really cares about them, that's going to have a huge positive impact on the outcomes they experience. And yet, we're also expected to not be affected by the work. So how are we supposed to genuinely care for somebody if we're also then supposed to not be affected by whatever is coming up? Like you can't have one and not the other, you know? Okay, there was one last category of response that is quite weighty. And I actually recorded most of the section and then my camera randomly shut off. I don't even know if I believe in signs, but I'm going to take it as a sign to just leave that super weighty topic out of this episode. I was already kind of on the fence about it because I always struggle with that. Like I want to acknowledge the genuine weighty things that come up in our profession, but I also, you're on YouTube or in your podcast listening to this episode, and you may not have known that you were just going to pop into a weighty topic. So I don't know, I'll consider like maybe linking in the description box if you want to see those last couple of responses that are weighty. But I think for the purposes of this episode, I will just leave them out. I'm going to listen to my camera who's saying, I don't want to film you doing this. Well, I think that's a good place to leave off on. And thank you, as always, to those who sent in your responses. I'm always amazed how many people respond and thoughtfully. It makes episodes like this so much more valuable. The lines feel a little more colored in to me when I have poll data like this. So I really appreciate you participating in the poll to make this episode possible. Well, I titled this episode that, therapists are allowed to have problems, right? And it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because of course therapists are allowed to have problems, but I just wanted to put this out there to say, like, whatever kind of problem you have or you're afraid might develop or something, like, it's so much better to make sure you find safe support to navigate that problem rather than to have the narrative, whether you created it or someone gave it to you, unfortunately, that like somehow you're not supposed to have that problem. So therefore it needs to stay a secret. Like, that is a recipe for spiraling. So I don't want anyone to spiral from the belief that we're not supposed to have problems or certain kinds of problems. I'd much rather you go get support. And I love that little edit that came at the end of the Reddit post that kicked off this episode, where that individual shared just like they're so grateful for how supportive the comments were. And may we have more of that in our profession, where folks are encouraged to name their concerns, feel supported, and hopefully then also have some tools to feel equipped to move through them and forward, even if forward includes bringing those significant struggles with you as you go forward. Okay, isn't that what we try to help our clients do? Like, I clearly have feelings about this. So thank you for joining me in this journey. Thank you for hanging with me, and feel free to leave in the comments if there's other topics like this that you feel like aren't getting as much attention in our field as they should, as far as it could be about anything, honestly. But I'm thinking in particular in the realm of like expectations people have about therapists, or, things that we're not supposed to experience or go through. I feel like we should just talk. Let's just talk about it. Let's just air it out. It's fine. Whatever it is, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Let's have some like secure attachment to ourselves and our profession, like, or at least move towards it. So I'd like to participate in that anywhere it's possible. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.